The entire hangar exploded with laughter the moment Victoria Hale crossed her arms and pointed at the silent janitor standing beside a half-disassembled helicopter. "Fix this helicopter," she said with a mocking smile loud enough for every engineer, executive, and technician in the building to hear, "and I'll kiss you right now." More laughter followed. Some people shook their heads. Others pulled out their phones, eager to capture what they assumed would be another embarrassing moment for Ethan Brooks, the middle-aged janitor who spent his nights mopping floors and emptying trash cans at Skyreach Aviation. To them, he was invisible. A man in a faded uniform with tired eyes and rough hands. A nobody. What they didn't know was that the helicopter sitting motionless in front of them represented the difference between success and disaster. A $300 million contract was hanging by a thread. The company's most advanced aircraft had suffered a mysterious mechanical failure only hours before a critical demonstration flight. For nearly 12 hours, the brightest aerospace engineers in the building had attacked the problem from every angle. They had run diagnostics, replaced components, analyzed software, and argued through the night. Nothing worked. The helicopter remained grounded and panic was beginning to spread through the company. Yet while everyone else focused on computer screens and technical reports, Ethan had quietly noticed something different. As he pushed his cleaning cart across the hangar floor, he recognized a sound, a faint vibration hidden beneath the roar of machinery. It was a sound he had heard years ago, long before anyone in this room had ever worn an engineer's badge. But Ethan wasn't supposed to know things like that. Not anymore. Life had taken everything from him. His prestigious career, his professional reputation, and eventually, even his beloved wife. Now he worked double shifts as a janitor just to keep alive the dream of one person who still mattered more than anything, his 17-year-old daughter Emily. She had earned acceptance into one of the nation's top engineering schools, but without money, her future was slipping away. So when the laughter echoed through the hangar and the CEO publicly humiliated him, Ethan could have walked away. Instead, he slowly stepped toward the crippled helicopter. And within minutes, everyone in that room was about to discover that the man holding a mop knew more about aircraft than all of them combined. At 5:30 every morning, long before the executives arrived, and long before the engineers filled the hangar with confident conversations and expensive coffee cups, Ethan Brooks was already at work. He pushed the same worn cleaning cart across the polished concrete floors of Skyreach Aviation, moving quietly through a world that seemed determined not to notice him. The fluorescent lights reflected off the massive aircraft parked inside the hangar, their sleek fuselages shining like symbols of innovation and success. Ethan often glanced at them while he worked, not with envy, but with familiarity. He understood every bolt, every panel, every hydraulic line hidden beneath their elegant exteriors. Yet no one looking at him would ever imagine that. To everyone at Skyreach, Ethan was simply the janitor. The middle-aged man with graying hair, faded work boots, and a blue maintenance uniform that never seemed quite clean, no matter how often he washed it. The man who emptied trash bins and cleaned coffee stains from conference room tables. The man people walked past without making eye contact. The man who no longer mattered. Years earlier, things had been very different. There had been a time when Ethan's name carried respect in aviation circles. He had spent more than 2 decades solving mechanical problems that others could not solve. He had worked on military helicopters, emergency rescue aircraft, and advanced civilian aviation systems. His hands had repaired machines worth tens of millions of dollars. Pilots trusted their lives to his judgment. Young technicians sought his advice. Supervisors fought to keep him on their teams. Back then, people listened when Ethan spoke. Back then, he wore a different uniform. Back then, his wife Sarah was still alive. The memory hit him unexpectedly as he emptied a trash container near the engineering offices. He remembered Sarah sitting beside him at the kitchen table years ago, smiling while helping their daughter Emily with a science project. Emily had only been 10, then her eyes wide with curiosity as she built a model helicopter from cardboard and glue. Sarah had laughed when the rotor blades fell off for the 3rd time. Ethan remembered that laugh. Some mornings it felt close enough to hear. Other mornings it felt as though it belonged to another lifetime. Everything changed after Sarah's diagnosis. Cancer arrived quietly and then consumed everything. Hospital visits replaced family vacations. Medical bills replaced savings accounts. Sleepless nights replaced dreams. Ethan had tried to hold everything together. He worked less to care for Sarah. Then he worked less to care for Emily when Sarah became too weak. Eventually, he lost the position he had spent years building. Certifications expired. Professional connections disappeared. By the time Sarah passed away, Ethan's career had already collapsed around him. All that remained was his daughter. Every decision afterward centered around one goal: giving Emily a future. The cleaning job at Skyreach had not been his first choice, but it offered health insurance, steady pay, and predictable hours. That was enough. Or at least he convinced himself it was enough. Unfortunately, the people around him saw only the uniform he wore now. On this particular morning, Ethan was mopping near Hangar 3 when a group of young engineers walked past. They were discussing a technical issue involving vibration sensors on one of the company's newest helicopters. Ethan recognized the model immediately. He knew its strengths and weaknesses better than some of the people designing upgrades for it. As he listened, he realized they were misdiagnosing the problem. One engineer suggested replacing an entire sensor array. Another proposed recalibrating the flight control software. Neither solution would solve the issue. Ethan knew that. He knew exactly where the real problem likely existed. For a moment, he considered speaking. Old instincts surfaced. Then he remembered previous experiences. The last time he had offered a suggestion, the room had erupted with laughter. He kept his mouth shut and continued mopping. Unfortunately, one of the engineers noticed him standing nearby. "Hey, Ethan," the young man called out. "You got something to say?" Several others turned and looked. Ethan offered a polite smile. "No, sir." "Good," another engineer replied with a smirk. "Because we're discussing aerospace engineering, not floor maintenance." The group laughed. Ethan forced himself to smile again. The engineers walked away, feeling clever. Ethan returned to his work. It happened almost every day. Sometimes the comments were subtle, sometimes they were cruel. Either way, he accepted them because he needed the paycheck. Emily's future depended on it. Around noon, Ethan received a text message. He glanced at his phone and immediately smiled. It was from Emily. "Guess what? I got another acceptance letter." Ethan stopped pushing his cart. His heart swelled with pride. Emily had worked incredibly hard. While other teenagers spent weekends at parties, she spent hers studying advanced mathematics and engineering concepts. She dreamed of designing aircraft one day. The irony was not lost on Ethan. His daughter wanted to build the future while he spent his days cleaning up after people who believed his future had already ended. He quickly replied, "I knew you would. Proud of you, kiddo." A few seconds later, another message arrived. "Love you, Dad." Ethan stared at the words longer than necessary. Some days, those 3 words were enough to keep him moving. Later that afternoon, activity intensified throughout Skyreach Aviation. Executives hurried through hallways. Engineers rushed between offices carrying tablets and technical reports. The company was preparing for a major event. A demonstration flight was scheduled within the next 24 hours. International investors were arriving. The contract under discussion could transform the company's future. Hundreds of jobs depended on its success. Everyone seemed nervous except Victoria Hale. The young CEO moved through the facility with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. At 38 years old, she had built a reputation as a brilliant business leader. Investors admired her. The media celebrated her. Employees feared her. Victoria demanded perfection and had little patience for mistakes. Ethan had encountered her only a handful of times. Each interaction left the same impression. She barely acknowledged his existence. To her, he was part of the furniture, useful when necessary, invisible the rest of the time. That evening, Ethan was cleaning near the executive conference room when Victoria and several senior engineers emerged from a meeting. Their discussion sounded tense. "Everything has to be flawless tomorrow," Victoria said sharply. "The investors cannot see weakness." One engineer nodded nervously. "We're still reviewing some vibration data from the aircraft." Victoria stopped walking. "Then review faster." The group continued toward the hangar. Ethan stepped aside to let them pass. As always, nobody acknowledged him. Nobody except one executive who accidentally dropped a folder. Papers scattered across the floor. Before anyone else reacted, Ethan crouched and gathered them. As he handed the documents back, his eyes briefly caught a technical diagram printed on one page. It showed a transmission assembly. Instantly, years of experience activated in his mind. He noticed something unusual in the schematic. A tiny detail. A potential weakness. The kind of thing only someone with thousands of hours of hands-on maintenance experience might notice. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. The executive took the papers without thanks and walked away. Ethan watched them disappear into the hangar. He returned to work. A few hours later, while cleaning near the maintenance bay, he overheard another conversation. Several engineers were gathered around the demonstration helicopter. Their voices sounded frustrated. One complained about unusual vibration readings. Another insisted the diagnostics were wrong. Ethan slowed his pace as he listened. Something about the discussion bothered him. The symptoms they described matched a rare issue he had encountered years ago. His instincts told him the engineers were looking in the wrong direction. Again, he considered speaking. Again, he remained silent. Experience had taught him a painful lesson. Knowledge means nothing when people refuse to hear it. Near the end of his shift, Ethan sat alone in the employee break room eating a simple sandwich he had packed from home. Around him, television screens displayed financial news. Analysts discussed billion-dollar companies and market forecasts. Ethan ignored them. Instead, he opened an email on his phone. The message came from the university Emily desperately wanted to attend. Tuition estimates filled the screen. Housing expenses, books, fees. The total felt overwhelming. Ethan calculated the numbers for the 100th time. No matter how he rearranged them, the result remained the same. He was still thousands of dollars short. A knot formed in his stomach. He had promised Emily she would go to college. He had promised Sarah too. The promise felt heavier every day. As he stared at the numbers, laughter erupted from a nearby table where several employees were eating dinner. One of them noticed Ethan looking at his phone. "What are you studying there, Professor?" the man joked. More laughter followed. Another employee leaned over. "Maybe he's learning how to upgrade from a mop to a vacuum cleaner." The group laughed again. Ethan lowered his eyes and returned to the email. The jokes continued for another minute before the employees finally lost interest. None of them noticed the sadness in his expression. None of them knew the battle he fought every day simply to give his daughter a chance at a better life. None of them knew that the quiet janitor they mocked had once solved aviation problems that experts couldn't solve. None of them knew that beneath the faded uniform stood a man carrying decades of experience, sacrifice, and heartbreak. They saw only what was in front of them. A janitor, a nobody, a forgotten man. And as the sun disappeared beyond the hangar windows and the enormous helicopters cast long shadows across the floor, Ethan Brooks picked up his cleaning cart and continued working in silence, unaware that within the next 24 hours the entire company would be forced to see him differently. Very differently. Because a crisis was already beginning to unfold inside Skyreach Aviation, and when the company's brightest minds eventually failed, the only person capable of saving them would be the man they had spent years laughing at. The crisis began at exactly 7:14 p.m., less than 12 hours before the most important demonstration flight in Skyreach Aviation's history. What started as a routine systems check quickly turned into a nightmare that spread through the company faster than wildfire. Ethan Brooks was finishing his evening cleaning route near Hangar 3 when he heard the first alarm. It wasn't loud enough to attract attention from outside the maintenance area, but to someone who had spent decades around aircraft, the sharp warning tone immediately signaled trouble. He glanced toward the helicopter scheduled for the morning demonstration and noticed several engineers suddenly gathering around it. Their relaxed conversations vanished. Faces tightened. Tablets appeared. Voices grew urgent. Something was wrong. Ethan continued pushing his cleaning cart, but his eyes remained fixed on the activity unfolding across the hangar. Within minutes, more engineers arrived, then supervisors, then senior technical specialists. The atmosphere changed completely. The confidence that had filled the building all day disappeared, replaced by tension so thick it seemed to hang in the air. Curious, Ethan moved closer while pretending to sweep a nearby section of floor. He listened carefully. "The vibration readings are getting worse," one engineer said. "Run the diagnostics again." Another snapped. "I already did. 3 times. Then run them a 4th time." Ethan lowered his head and continued working. But internally, every alarm bell from his years of experience began ringing. Vibration issues were dangerous. Very dangerous. Especially in helicopters. A vibration that appeared minor on the ground could become catastrophic in flight. A single overlooked mechanical defect could destroy an aircraft within minutes. 30 minutes later, Victoria Hale stormed into the hangar. Her heels struck the concrete floor with sharp, impatient clicks. The moment employees saw her approaching, conversations stopped. Everyone understood the stakes. The demonstration flight scheduled for the following morning wasn't just another corporate event. International investors had already arrived in Dallas. Representatives from multiple governments were expected to attend. Media coverage had been arranged. Most importantly, a contract worth nearly $300 million depended on that helicopter performing flawlessly. If the aircraft failed to fly, the deal would almost certainly collapse. "Tell me this is under control," Victoria demanded. No one answered immediately. The silence itself became the answer. Victoria's expression hardened. I asked a question. Chief Engineer Marcus Reynolds swallowed. "We're still investigating." "Still investigating," Victoria repeated. "What exactly does that mean?" Marcus hesitated. "It means we haven't identified the source of the vibration." The words landed like a bomb. Ethan watched from across the hangar as Victoria's face lost color. For the first time, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. "How long?" she asked quietly. "About 4 hours." 4 hours. Her voice rose. "You've had 4 hours and nobody knows what's causing it." No one spoke. Ethan understood their panic. A mysterious vibration problem was one of the most frustrating failures an aviation team could face. Modern aircraft generated enormous amounts of diagnostic data, but certain mechanical faults hid between the numbers. They whispered instead of screamed. Computers missed them. Sensors misinterpreted them. Engineers chased symptoms while the actual cause remained buried deep inside the machine. Ethan knew because he had fought battles like this before. Real battles. The kind where lives depended on finding the answer before takeoff. By 9 o'clock, the situation had deteriorated dramatically. The maintenance bay resembled a war room. Engineers crowded around laptops. Technical drawings covered tables. Parts were removed and inspected. Entire systems were tested repeatedly. Yet every attempt ended with the same result. The vibration remained. Ethan continued working nearby. Nobody paid attention to him. That invisibility allowed him to observe everything. He listened to every theory, every argument, every proposed solution. One engineer blamed the flight control software. Another suspected a faulty sensor network. A third insisted the problem originated in the rotor assembly. Hours passed. Millions of dollars hung in the balance. Still, nobody found the answer. Then Ethan heard something that made him stop sweeping. The helicopter's systems were activated again for another diagnostic cycle. A faint sound echoed through the hangar. Most people ignored it. To them, it sounded insignificant. To Ethan, it felt like a voice from the past. His grip tightened around the broom handle. He knew that sound. Not exactly, not perfectly, but enough. Somewhere deep in his memory, a similar vibration echoed from years ago. A military transport helicopter. Desert conditions. Emergency maintenance. A defect so rare that most technicians never encountered it during their entire careers. Ethan's heart began beating faster. He moved slightly closer and listened again. There it was. Faint, irregular, almost hidden beneath the normal operational noise. But it was there. For the first time that evening, he believed he might already know where the problem existed. The realization should have excited him. Instead, it filled him with hesitation. He had learned long ago that knowledge alone wasn't enough. People had to be willing to listen, and nobody at Sky Reach listened to janitors. Around 10:30, Ethan received another text message from Emily. "Dad, are you still at work?" His expression softened immediately. "Yeah, kiddo. Busy night. Don't stay too late." Ethan smiled, trying not to. A few moments later, another message appeared. "I got the scholarship interview invitation." Ethan froze. Scholarship interview. The words hit him harder than any technical problem in the hangar. This was the opportunity Emily desperately needed. Without financial aid, attending her dream university would be nearly impossible. Ethan stared at the screen. Tears threatened to form in his eyes. He quickly typed back. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you." "Think I have a chance," she replied. Ethan didn't hesitate. "You have every chance." What he didn't say was that scholarships alone probably wouldn't cover everything. He had already calculated the numbers hundreds of times. Even if Emily received aid, there would still be expenses: housing, books, transportation, fees. Every path led back to the same painful reality: money. Money he didn't have. Money he had no idea how to find. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked toward the helicopter. Engineers were still struggling. The contract, the investors, the aircraft. Suddenly, everything felt connected. A strange thought entered his mind. If he somehow solved this problem, would anyone finally notice him? Would anyone recognize what he could do? Could it create opportunities he never imagined? The idea vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. No, they wouldn't listen. They never did. Near midnight, the company brought in outside specialists. Two highly respected aviation consultants arrived carrying cases full of diagnostic equipment. Their reputations alone reassured some employees. If anyone could solve the mystery, surely these experts could. Ethan watched them begin their analysis. He listened carefully to their conclusions. Within 15 minutes, he knew they were heading in the wrong direction. The consultants focused entirely on electronic systems. Ethan suspected the problem was mechanical, a tiny but critical difference. Hours continued passing. Midnight became 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock became 2. Fatigue spread through the hangar. Tempers flared. Arguments erupted. Victoria remained present the entire time. She paced constantly, checking her watch, making phone calls, demanding updates. Each update sounded worse than the previous one. Nothing yet. Still testing. No answers. The words repeated endlessly. At 2:15 in the morning, Ethan stood alone near the rear section of the aircraft while emptying a trash container. Nobody noticed him. Everyone was too focused on the crisis. He stared at the transmission housing. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. The vibration wasn't coming from where the engineers were looking. It couldn't be. The pattern was wrong. The frequency was wrong. The symptoms were wrong. He knew exactly which assembly he would inspect first if given the chance. Yet he remained silent. Fear held him back. Not fear of failure. Fear of humiliation. Fear of becoming the punchline once again. Fear of hearing the laughter, the same laughter he had endured for years. Then another thought appeared. Emily. He pictured her sitting at the kitchen table, studying late into the night. He pictured the university acceptance letters. He pictured Sarah lying in a hospital bed years earlier, squeezing his hand and whispering a promise. Take care of our girl. Ethan closed his eyes. Every sacrifice, every double shift, every insult, every lonely night. He had endured it all for Emily. Suddenly, the problem in front of him no longer felt like somebody else's crisis. It felt like an opportunity, a dangerous one, a terrifying one, but an opportunity nonetheless. Across the hangar, voices grew louder again. Another theory had failed. Another expensive component had been ruled out. The frustration was becoming unbearable. Victoria slammed a folder onto a table. "How is this possible?" she demanded. "You're telling me the best engineers in this company can't fix one helicopter?" Nobody answered, because nobody could. Ethan looked down at his calloused hands. Hands that once repaired aircraft in combat zones. Hands that once trained elite technicians. Hands that now pushed a mop for a living. Then he looked at the helicopter one more time. Deep inside, he already knew the truth. He knew where he would start. He knew what he would inspect. He knew there was a chance, a real chance, that he could solve the problem everyone else had missed. But stepping forward would change everything. If he was wrong, he would become a laughingstock. If he was right, his entire life could shift in ways he couldn't predict. As the clock crept toward 3 in the morning and panic tightened its grip on Skyreach Aviation, Ethan Brooks stood silently in the shadows of the hangar, staring at the crippled helicopter while a battle raged inside him. The engineers were running out of ideas. The company was running out of time, and for the first time in years, the forgotten janitor found himself standing on the edge of a decision that could alter not only the future of Skyreach Aviation, but the future of his daughter as well. The question was no longer whether he knew the answer. The question was whether he had the courage to speak. By 3:30 in the morning, exhaustion had begun to erode the confidence of everyone inside Skyreach Aviation's main hangar. The atmosphere no longer resembled a high-tech engineering facility. It felt more like a battlefield after a losing campaign. Coffee cups littered workbenches. Technical reports lay scattered across tables. Engineers who had once spoken with certainty now stared blankly at computer screens hoping for answers that never came. The helicopter remained grounded, silent, and stubborn, refusing to reveal the source of the vibration that threatened to destroy a $300 million contract. Victoria Hale stood near the aircraft with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. For the first time since arriving, she looked defeated. Every specialist had failed. Every theory had collapsed. Every expensive diagnostic tool had produced nothing useful. The investors were scheduled to arrive in only a few hours, and the company's future was slipping away minute by minute. Ethan Brooks watched from the shadows near the maintenance area. His heart pounded heavily. The internal battle that had consumed him for hours had finally reached its breaking point. He knew what he was hearing. He knew what he was seeing. More importantly, he knew exactly where he would begin looking. Taking a slow breath, he set aside his broom. Then he quietly walked toward the group of engineers. At first, no one noticed him. Then Marcus Reynolds turned and frowned. "Ethan." The room grew slightly quieter. "What are you doing here?" Ethan glanced at the helicopter. "I think I may know where the problem is." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then laughter erupted. Several engineers exchanged amused looks. One nearly choked on his coffee. "You," another engineer said, "you know what's wrong with the aircraft." More laughter followed. Ethan remained calm. "I'd like to take a look." The mocking smiles spread immediately. Victoria rubbed her forehead as if she didn't have the energy for this conversation. "Mr. Brooks," she said impatiently, "this isn't the time." "I understand." "No, I don't think you do." Her voice sharpened. "The best engineers in this company have spent all night trying to solve this. We brought in outside experts. Nobody can find the problem." Ethan nodded. "I know." The response irritated her. "Then why exactly do you think you can—" The entire group watched him now. Ethan could feel their judgment. Years of ridicule echoed in the room. every insult, every joke, every dismissive glance, yet he remained composed. "Because I've seen something similar before." Another engineer laughed openly. "Where? On a vacuum cleaner." More laughter exploded across the hangar. Victoria shook her head. "Enough!" Then she looked directly at Ethan. Her patience finally snapped. "Fine. Tell me. What's wrong with it?" Ethan hesitated. "I'd need to inspect one section first." That answer triggered even more amusement. Victoria let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Then she delivered the sentence everyone would remember. "You know what?" she said loudly enough for the entire hangar to hear. "Fix this helicopter and I'll kiss you right now." The room erupted. Engineers laughed. Technicians laughed. Even some supervisors smiled. A few employees pulled out their phones. To them, the situation was absurd. A janitor claiming he could solve a problem that had defeated elite aerospace specialists. Ethan felt his face grow warm, but he didn't react. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he simply asked one question. "Will you let me look?" Victoria stared at him for several seconds. The confidence she had carried all night was gone. Desperation was beginning to replace it. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "Fine. 5 minutes." The laughter continued as Ethan stepped forward, but something changed the moment he entered the technical area. He no longer moved like a janitor. His posture shifted, his eyes sharpened, his focus became absolute. Several engineers noticed immediately. The man approaching the helicopter looked completely different from the quiet cleaner they saw every day. Ethan walked directly to the transmission section without hesitation. He didn't ask questions. He didn't study manuals. He didn't consult diagnostic reports. He already knew where he wanted to look. That alone caused a few curious glances. Marcus frowned. How does he know where to start? Nobody answered. Ethan requested a flashlight. One engineer reluctantly handed it over. Then Ethan crouched beside the aircraft and began listening. Not looking. Listening. He placed one hand gently against the housing and closed his eyes. The room gradually fell silent. The confidence that had fueled the earlier laughter started fading. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Ethan examined bolts, alignment marks, and connection points with extraordinary precision. His hands moved confidently like someone performing a familiar routine. There was no uncertainty, no guessing, no hesitation. Victoria watched closely. Her expression slowly changed from amusement to confusion. Then Ethan suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed. He leaned closer to a small assembly hidden deep within the transmission housing. There, he said quietly. Nobody understood what he meant. Ethan pointed toward a component barely larger than a thumb. Remove that panel. Marcus frowned. Why? Ethan looked at him. Because that's where your problem is. The chief engineer hesitated. Every instinct told him this was ridiculous. Yet after 10 hours of failure, he had no better option. The panel was removed. Several engineers shined lights inside. Seconds later, confusion spread across their faces. Then shock. Marcus moved closer. No way. One of the outside consultants stared into the opening. That's impossible. Hidden deep inside the assembly was a tiny spacer ring. It had shifted slightly out of alignment. The defect was almost invisible, small enough to escape multiple inspections. Yet under operating conditions, it created a resonance vibration throughout the entire transmission system. A rare failure. An extremely rare failure. Exactly the kind Ethan remembered from years ago. The room became completely silent. Nobody laughed now. Nobody smiled. They simply stared. Ethan calmly explained what needed to be done. Replace the spacer, recalibrate the alignment, then test the transmission again. Marcus looked stunned. That's it. Ethan nodded. That's it. Within minutes, the repair process began. The engineers worked quickly, following Ethan's instructions. Victoria watched every second. Her heartbeat felt louder than the tools. If this failed, the company was finished. 20 minutes later, the replacement was complete. Everyone gathered around the aircraft. Nobody spoke. Marcus climbed into the cockpit. The systems powered on. The helicopter hummed to life. Every eye focused on the vibration monitors. Seconds passed, then another 10 seconds, then 30. The numbers remained stable. Marcus increased power. The rotor system accelerated. The familiar vibration never appeared. Engineers stared at their screens in disbelief. One technician checked the data twice. Another checked it 3 times. The readings remained perfect. Marcus looked up from the cockpit. His face was pale with shock. "It's gone." Nobody moved. "What?" Victoria whispered. "The vibration is gone," Marcus repeated. "Completely gone." For a brief moment, the hangar seemed frozen in time. Then reality crashed into everyone at once. Cheers erupted from every corner of the building. Engineers who had spent the entire night fighting the problem suddenly shouted with relief. Technicians clapped. Supervisors laughed. Some employees could hardly believe what they had witnessed. The helicopter was operational again. The demonstration flight was saved. The contract was saved. The company was saved. And the person responsible was not an executive, not a consultant, and not one of the highly paid engineers. It was the janitor. Ethan stood quietly beside the aircraft while celebration exploded around him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He simply looked at the helicopter, relieved to know he had been right. Across the hangar, Victoria stared at him as though she were seeing him for the first time. The man she had mocked only minutes earlier had solved a problem that defeated every expert she trusted. The laughter was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was disbelief. And as dozens of employees slowly turned their attention toward Ethan Brooks, one question began spreading through the room like wildfire. Who exactly was the janitor that had just saved Skyreach Aviation? The answer arrived the very next day. After the successful demonstration flight stunned investors and secured the $300 million contract, Victoria Hale ordered a full review of Ethan Brooks's background. What she discovered left her speechless. The quiet janitor she had mocked in front of an entire hangar was not an ordinary maintenance worker who happened to get lucky. Ethan had once been one of the most respected aviation maintenance specialists in the country. His record included decades of experience, military commendations, advanced certifications, and countless aircraft saved from critical failures. Engineers who had laughed at him the night before sat in stunned silence as his accomplishments were revealed. But what affected them most was not his resume. It was the reason he had walked away from all of it. They learned about Sarah, his wife, and her long battle with cancer. They learned how Ethan had sacrificed promotion after promotion, opportunity after opportunity to care for her and raise their daughter. They learned that after Sarah's death, he had accepted whatever work he could find simply to keep food on the table and preserve Emily's dream of attending college. Suddenly, the man they had viewed as a janitor became something far greater in their eyes. He was a father who had quietly carried a burden heavier than any of them could imagine. A week later, the entire company gathered in the main hangar. This time, Ethan was not standing in the shadows with a mop in his hand. He stood at the center of the room. Victoria stepped onto the stage and looked directly at him. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, in front of hundreds of employees, she did something nobody expected. She apologized, not with corporate language, not with excuses, a genuine apology. She admitted she had judged a man by his uniform instead of his character. She admitted she had mocked someone she should have respected. The hangar remained silent as she turned toward Ethan and announced that Skyreach Aviation would fund Emily Brooks's entire college education, including tuition, housing, books, and every expense necessary to help her achieve her dream. Tears immediately filled Ethan's eyes. Before he could speak, Victoria revealed one final surprise. Effective immediately, Ethan Brooks would return to aviation not as a janitor, but as Senior Director of Technical Operations, a position reflecting the expertise he had earned long ago. The applause that followed seemed endless. Months later, on a bright autumn morning, Ethan stood outside the gates of the university Emily had dreamed about for years. Students moved across campus carrying backpacks and excitement for the future. Emily turned before entering the main building and smiled at her father. For a moment, Ethan saw Sarah in that smile. He saw every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every insult he had endured, and every painful choice he had made. None of it felt wasted anymore. As Emily walked toward the future she had fought so hard to reach, Ethan remained standing beneath the morning sunlight, his eyes filled with tears and pride. He had once lost his career, his status, and the life he thought he would have. But he never lost what mattered most. And in the end, the world finally recognized what his daughter had known all along. The man carrying the mop was never just a janitor. He was a hero hiding in plain sight.